Sunny. Yesterday my life was filled with rain. Sunny. Oh, oh. He smiled at me and really eased the pain. Now the dark days are gone and bright days are here. My sunny one sound so sincere. Sunny one so true. I love you.
Welcome to this tour of Gibbs in the Back Bay. I am thrilled to have you here. My name's Rose Doherty. I am former academic dean of Boston. I'm chair of the Gibbs Board of Trustees, and I was also interim dean for a while in 2004. So what we're going to do is spend some time today touring the beautiful sights of Gibbs in Back Bay. And you're going to have to edit this because I'm not used to talking. I like talking to people.
That's fine, but can you tell me a little bit about the tour? What is the store about?
Okay. First of all, Katharine Gibbs School was called the Harvard of Secretarial, and it was called that because it was the best of the world. Had there been a U.S. News and World Report, it would have been #1 every single year that it existed. Well, at least the 20s through at least. Anyhow, the reason that we are here today is that Katharine Gibbs School was an entrepreneur. Katharine Gibbs was an entrepreneur back when women were not entrepreneurs. She was CEO of 3 schools before women had the vote. Not bad. And she did this. She was a widow at that point. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gibbs' history and show her some of the sights. And I am going to tell you a little bit about Katharine Gibbs. First of all, she was born in 1863 in Illinois. And people from around here tend to think, oh, she had to be a New Englander. But she wasn't. She was the granddaughter of Irish immigrants who had enough sense not to stay in Boston, but to go west and make their fortunes. And they eventually ended up in Galena, Illinois, 3 miles from the Mississippi River, where her father, Catherine Bryant, Gibbs' father, and his brother ran a wholesale grocery business. They sold food to people going across the Mississippi to Olmsted. It was the perfect business. He was also a very important man on the board of the bank and the Toledo, Chicago Railroad. And she was 13, and they moved her into, along with her brothers and sisters, into a 26-room mansion in Galena. And even a 13-year-old refused.
Tell me about that. Where was the first school?
The first school in Boston was in 2 rooms in Nottingham chain.
So over there.
Right over there.
Okay.
Now remember, what she's trying to do is support a family. She also has to support her sister who has come east to help take care of the boys. So across the street, where the hotels now are, she actually had a dramatic school.
Okay.
Because the whole point here is to make money to support family. So quite a amount.
Where that hotel is right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so what was there?
That was the Kate Ryan, and we think it was her because Kate Ryan is the name she used at Hattonville. And what she did was she had a dramatic school, so she taught people how to do public speaking, how to do performance art, how to wear makeup, but not too much, of course, obviously. And she was here for a year, but it was 1917. So at this point, if you had a secretarial school, it was co-ed because it was easier to place men. Women were known only by the machines. They were called typewriters.
Okay.
Okay, and so 1917 comes and we join the First World War. Suddenly, our audience disappears, or 50% of it.
Who disappeared?
The men.
Oh, the men
Well,
disappeared.
there were 3 drafts in 1917.
Okay.
So the men disappeared. So did she even hesitate for a minute? Well, what she did was she changed the tagline of the school to a school for educated women. She never had a marketing course, never. But her sense of self was impeccable, and it was really, really excellent.
So what was the significance? So we're at the Boston Library, and the first school was over there in those buildings. What was the significance of being next to the Boston Library?
She knew that Back Bay was the ultimate place to be.
Okay.
And this is technically not Back Bay, but it's so close.
So it was location, location, location.
Location, location, location. That's what she's going to depend on all the time. And what we're going to do is take a look at some of those locations that she developed. Now, by the time she came to Boston, okay, all of those men had gone off to war. They had been drafted. And by the time she started school in September of 1917, she was starting classes every Monday in order to get the number of people that she needed.
Okay.
Now, she was a very shrewd businesswoman. Meanwhile, she and her sons had, by 1918, had moved to New York and were living in the West 50s, a few steps from Fifth Avenue. And by 1930, this woman who had to go to the probate court, the family court, to get money to start in Boston, she was making over $1 million in divorce money. She was really incredible. Let's go and take a look at the kinds of places she saw as appropriate for Katharine. We had behind me is a Gibbs campus. We have on Dartmouth Street, building that was dormitory and classrooms. And next to it on Commonwealth Avenue, we have 151, which was classrooms and dormitory. And then 135 next to it, which was a dormitory. Let's go and take a look at the individual buildings.
So what was here? This was old campus?
Those 3 buildings were a campus.
So these buildings there on Com Ave, this was Katharine Gibbs School.
Myth.
And what years was that?
That was, I should know this at, 151 Commonwealth was bought in 24. It was moved in by students in 25.
So this building on the corner right here.
Yeah. Let us go over there.
Okay.
With commute more. We are not give her this quite.
So this was like the center of the New England universe in those days, right?
Oh, yes, it was absolutely the way. And women at that point, well, I grew up in Providence. So in Providence, you could go to Rhode Island College, you could go to Pembroke, which was the women's college at Brown, or you could go to Katharine Gibbs. Or like Meredith Vieira, you could go to Brown and then go to Katharine Gibbs. So the graduate.
So in those days, women couldn't go just to any college, right? There were specific colleges where they had to go.
Right. You couldn't go to Harvard, for example.
Okay.
It would eventually be Radcliffe. You couldn't go to Brown. There would be Pembroke. But what I want to show you is what was the administrative schooling of quite a while.
So could men go to Katharine Gibbs in those days?
No, actually they were not, because men did not want to be secretaries. And in fact, there's a wonderful story of a man who, throughout the projects in New York, we decided that he had a 4-year scholarship to an Ivy, and he decided he didn't want to go. He wanted to go to Gibbs. And getting him a job was not too easy, but he eventually got one at Batten, Barton, Durston, and Osborne, which is now BBO, I guess. Anyhow.
And what year was that?
That was in the 80s.
In the 80s?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking, it took a long time because men didn't want to have men as secretaries.
Okay.
They really didn't want to. And this guy, he did very well in the company. And one day his boss called him in and said, I have to talk to you. And he thought, I've done everything that I can possibly do. And the guy said, you're so good. I'll give you a choice. I'll give you a 4-year scholarship to Yale, or you can stay here and be mentored by one of the executives. And he chose to be mentored by one of the executives. And he now owns his own company.
So that gentleman, was he the first man to go to Katharine Gibbs?
No, actually, there were men who came to Katharine Gibbs in Boston. There was one man whose daughter was accepted. He came, he saw what she was having as an education, and he asked to come himself. Also, Gibbs always was looking for the main chance. So there was a program called Entree, which was for college graduates who couldn't get a job because they didn't have the skills that could be used immediately. And that was open to both men and women from the very beginning.
And so in terms of money, was it expensive for women to go to Katharine Gibbs in the beginning, in the 1920s and 30s?
Well, yes, it was, because Katharine Gibbs made sure that she marketed her school. She put together a booklet that showed all of the schools from which her students came, like the finest private schools and finest colleges. They came to Gibbs. Now, the majority of students were from public high schools, but that wasn't going to convince a parent to give up the money.
So these buildings here, this was the campus in 1920s and 30s for Katharine Gibbs School in Boston, correct?
Yes, indeed.
And how much did it cost in those days for a woman to go to college? Do you remember?
I cannot, I should know. I should be able to say what it cost to go to college and what it cost to go to Gibbs.
But was it compatible to?
It was comparable.
Okay.
It was comparable, although when the women got out, they had to make their own way. They didn't have a clear path. But I have some other stuff to show you.
Okay, but I just wanted to ask one more question. So how did women pay to go to Katharine Gibbs?
Oh, well, first of all, they were all minors, and their fathers had to sign the contracts because they weren't able to sign the contracts.
Okay.
And they also had to be well-to-do. And one of the things that Katharine Gibbs, when she put together that booklet that said where people came from, what she was doing was marketing herself to a certain level of society and to those parents who wanted their daughters to have access to an upper level of society. She was very much aware what was happening. Now, we talked a little bit a while ago about the trauma of the First World War, which got rid of half of the students. Then there was the Depression.
Okay.
And that was serious.
So, but before the Depression, when the women came here in the 1920s and 30s, so they had to be sent by their parents.
Yes.
Because they didn't really have a right of their own. They couldn't pick their own rite of passage, so their parents would have to send them here and pay for it, correct?
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, there was in a 1950s Saturday Evening Post story about Gibbs. And I was giving a talk, and one woman said, my father saw that story, and it was about these buildings and this school. And this father in California said, that's where you're going to school.
Okay.
No.
So in those days, Katharine Gibbs had a significant name among women's schools where women could go, right?
It was absolutely the place. And if you talk to people of a certain age, oh, you taught at Katharine Gibbs School? Oh my goodness. That was the best place. I wanted to go there, and my parents couldn't afford it. And there's another wonderful story. Mrs. Gibbs at one point had someone come in. There were a lot of schools around here for women. And one of the financial people came in and said, well, they're all waiting for you to set your tuition, Mrs. Gibbs, so they can set theirs a little bit lower. And they said, no, they know what they're worth, and we know what we're worth.
So how long did women go to school here to become a secretary or have that job?
It was a 1-year program, which was entirely technical, or it would be a 2-year program that would have liberal arts classes, and she put her schools very wisely in cities that had really good lecturers available. So in Providence, she could go to Brown and get lecturers on her liberal arts courses. Here, she could go to Harvard or MIT and get lecturers. When she was in New York, she had the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences teaching at Gibbs.
So today in 2023, like the tuition in like good schools where women can go is probably somewhere around 1 year's salary for when they get out, right? So if you go to like BU or Northeastern or BC, these days you're going to be paying $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, and you have to go to 4 years. Would that be similar in those days? Would they pay 1 year's salary to go for the school for 1 year, or would it be less than that?
It was probably less than that because it was also a time when women in the workforce, if they did go to work, and not everyone did, some of them just came to Gibbs to spend a year or two, but they never went to work because the parents had enough money. But when they went to work, it was a matter of they were not paid well. There were salaries for men and salaries for women, and it took a long time for women to be accepted as equals in the workplace.
And in those days, what was the incentive for women to go to work?
They needed to have money because not everyone got married. A lot of people who got married were widowed or the husband got a new wife. So it was the same old salary, of course. Also, the same things would drive women back then that drive women now. I want to have a sense of purpose and have some respect and be able and do things in my work.
And when did it become like acceptable in this area in New England for women to go to work and make their own wages and build their own life? Was that around World War II when?
I was much after World War II.
Okay.
During World War II, a lot of women had jobs because men were off fighting. But as soon as the men came home, the women were all fired.
Okay.
And during World War II, the men who had been secretaries in Chicago offices, for example, had to go off to boot camp. And if you were just enrolled in a secretarial school, you would get a job. But you didn't know how to do any of the work. And so Chicago businessmen came to Gordon Gibbs and said, please start a school in Chicago. And he did in 1943, in the middle of the war. And no one got to escape from the Gibbs curriculum, which was very strict, the Gibbs dress code, the Gibbs level of decorum behavior in every situation that was held by the Chicago school, as well as the three that Mrs. Gibbs is.
So when it came to dress code, what was the dress code like for women at Katharine Gibbs in those days?
You always wore a skirt, you wore nylons, and you didn't wear nylons, you wore silk stockings, because there was no nylon until the 1939 World's Fair. It's called nylon because it was introduced in New York. But you always wore stockings, shoes at least 2 inches. 2 inches was considered the appropriate length. Your hair could not touch your collar, and you always had to be dressed as if you were going to work. And it was a brilliant thing to do because you were taking 18-year-olds who really didn't know how to behave at work, and you were insisting that they start behaving like professionals. I taught at Boston College, where people would kind of roll in from the dorms.
In their pajamas?
In their pajamas, pajama bottoms, yes, absolutely. And I walked into Gibbs, and there, these women were all beautifully put together. They were sitting in alphabetical order, and they had the papers out before I came into the room.
So was that part of the...
just 18-year-olds.
Was that part of the brand, the part of the image?
Absolutely part of the image. Absolutely. And one of the reasons that I called my book about Gibbs, Katharine Gibbs Beyond White Gloves, is because the people who went to Gibbs in the old days went well beyond white gloves. And certainly when Gibbs branched out, when secretaries were no longer needed, and branched out to computer network operations and graphic design and so forth, that was going way beyond white gloves. And it was white gloves because Gibbs students were known, if they graduated in June, they would go to their interview wearing a hat. You had to wear a hat. Oh, that's another thing. And you had to wear gloves. And it would be white gloves from Memorial Day, Decoration Day, as it was called then, to Labor Day. And then you would put on dark gloves. But let me show you something that I think is really fascinating.
Okay.
Katharine Gibbs was a counselor.
Oh, wow.
An Irish Tasha. What we have up there at 151, which was Katharine Gibbs School, is a green man. And that is a fertility symbol, a Celtic fertility symbol. And he actually has this hair and his beard are thin.
So that guy right there in the center.
That guy right there, yes.
And was that introduced by the Katharine Gibbs School when the...
No, it was a very, it was actually something that was done in the 19th century. Well, there are a lot of much older churches, 13th, 14th century churches in Europe that have the green man, but it became very popular in the United States in the 19th century. And you've heard of Biltmore Estate and Asheville.
So what's the significance of having that here?
Well, because he was seen as a Celtic symbol of spring, revival, renewal, just as we are all experiencing now. So my reaction when I first saw him was, Katharine Gibbs didn't know what that was about, because she wouldn't have her young ladies coming to a school with a fertility symbol. Oh, yes, she would, because her house, that 26-room house in Galena, Illinois, was before there were really great instruments. It was placed 2 degrees off the true mark for the solstices. And on the winter and summer solstice, the sunlight comes into the middle of the house and goes all the way down to a beautiful set of Czechoslovakian red engraved glass doors. It is spectacular. So Katharine Gibbs would have known this exactly.
And she kept that here for a reason, right?
Yes, and I think so.
And she owned the building, so if she wanted to, she could have taken it down.
Yes, she did own the building. That's another thing. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about this building before it was purchased by the Gibbs School. It was designed by Robert Gould Shaw, not the Robert Gould Shaw of the monument on the Common of the 54th Regiment, the officer for the 54th Regiment, but his first cousin. This obviously is a family that doesn't do well with names. They had 2 Robert Gould Shaws and about the same dad. Anyhow, Robert Gould Shaw bought 2 pieces of land here, and what he did was he designed both of these houses.
So this here.
Yes, actually, right there from 303.
Okay.
First bay is 303.
That one.
Right for 303 is where the drain pipe is. And then everything down to the next drain pipe is actually 151. But it's all designed symmetrically. Now, Robert Gould Shaw married a Honeywell from Wellesley, and the house on the corner on Dartmouth Street was actually purchased was built for the wife's brother. And then there was another house down across the alley where we had another brother. So there was a kind of family compound before Gibbs bought it.
So what year was this built? Like, what years are we talking? Is that in the 1900s or?
Oh, yes. It was built, really kind of have to. It was built in 1876, 77.
So the building was here for about 50 years before Katharine Gibbs bought it.
Because Gibbs bought it in 24. So it was just about 50 years. And
what was here during that time? So this now, it's a park.
This is actually all filled land. All of this land comes from Needham, my town.
This land that was here in between the buildings?
That's no land.
Oh, what's
It's all water.
Oh,
This was Back Bay. This was really a bay all the way from Charles Street down to Brookline. It was all water.
and was it water here when these buildings were built?
No, the
So it was filled and then the buildings were constructed. Okay.
and they started filling it, what is now the public garden, and then they worked down to Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth, Exeter, Fitterfield, Gloucester, Herrick.
So was there a park here in the days of Katharine Gibbs?
Yes. It was a park. The mall was here. It had, at that point, it had elm trees 4 across, but elm disease has killed just about all of them.
So the streets must have been narrower back then because you didn't have cars or trucks. It was all horse-driven carriage, right?
Indeed, it was. And in fact, when you give me your email, what I will do is send you a handout that I send to people, and it includes all of the facts about these buildings, the dates that Gibbs had them, and pictures. Because I found people were going too much of this, and I'm sorry, this is
We're right here.
quite beautiful.
Yeah.
The 2 houses, but Ken, let me show you.
Okay. So was there more to the campus? The women, they lived on campus here in these buildings, right?
Well, you wanted boarding students because they were worth 3 times commuters.
What does that mean?
It means that you could get more money from people who were living on campus.
Okay.
Okay, so say I cannot give you an exact amount, but say a commuter paid $1,000 a year, a boarder would pay $3,000. So, okay, so
And what were the salaries back then? Like yearly salaries?
and
Okay. Well, we can look that up.
yeah, no, actually it's not available. Mrs. Gibbs' salary is available, not salary, but her income is available because the census gives it.
Well, she owned the schools. She was a business owner, so she was the risk taker.
Oh, yes, and she was successful. Okay, so one of the things that she did was she purchased this building, 135, as a dormitory. And I told you that what she
This one, 135.
135.
Okay.
And what she would do was, or what her son would actually do, is put interior doors so that students could come from their rooms and just go to class without ever going outside.
So this was all women or mostly women?
It's all him at this point.
So are there any stories of them trying to sneak in men?
Oh,
Or was that
absolutely. In fact, I'll even show you how they did it.
we want to see that one.
Okay. Anyhow, when the Gibbs family decided to sell this property,
And what year was that?
they sold it in 1956. They sold 135, 151, and 303 Dartmouth in 1956.
And was Katharine Gibbs still around back then?
No, Katharine Gibbs died in 1934. However, people always say to me, "Oh, did you know Mrs. Gibbs?" And I'll say, "I don't know how old you think I am, but no."
Okay. Why don't they ask if you knew Abraham Lincoln or Peter the Great?
Exactly my feeling too. Anyhow,
So who ran the school when she passed away?
her son. And actually, I'll tell you the whole sad story here. She had 2 sons. According to their obituaries, they each served in the First World War. I cannot find any evidence of William, the older one, actually serving. But when the whole Gibbs family and Catherine's sister Mary moved to New York, they moved first of all to the West 50s, and then eventually they moved to Park Avenue. Why not? Right? And they lived in a beautiful apartment on Fifth Avenue.
So when the school was here on Com Ave,
Someone else was running it.
someone else was running it, but the sons were living in
New York.
New York. So then she dies in 1934.
Right.
And do they come to Boston, and how old were they?
Oh, they were born, Orden was born in 1900. So,
Okay.
yeah, they were.
So they were in their 30s or 40s by that time.
Exactly. But when I need to tell you one more story, We know that Gordon did serve, the younger one served in the First World War. William cannot find any record of his actual service, but he was very disturbed and eventually threw himself out of their window on Park Avenue and killed himself.
Was there something?
1934.
Was there like an unhappy love story there? No. Was he fighting with his brother?
No, as a matter of fact, he had almost nothing to do with the school.
Oh, okay.
Evidently had problems all along. And he left a note that said either this or the madhouse. Ask those who know.
That was his note.
Yes, that was his note.
So he chose to jump out of the window. That was his.
Now, it's 1934. In 1934, suicides could not be buried in Catholic cemeteries because it was the one sin. There was no opportunity to repent. So suicides could not be buried in Catholic cemeteries. Katharine Gibbs' husband was buried in St. Anne's Catholic Cemetery in Cranston, Rhode Island. Was Katharine Gibbs going to say, this is not right? Well, she couldn't. There are some things she couldn't fight. However, what she did was she had her husband disinterred, had his body dug up, and moved to cemetery in the Bronx, a non-sectarian cemetery, so the brother and the son and husband could be buried together. And now Katharine Gibbs is there too, and so is Mary, the sister.
Wow.
How about that? I mean, this was a lady who simply did not suffer fools.
So she had to have her way.
Absolutely. Someone said to me once, would you have liked working for her? Absolutely not. I am a control freak, and she is the best control freak I've ever heard.
When was her birthday?
January 10th.
I see.
She's a Capricorn like me.
Oh.
We would not have gotten along at all.
Now we're getting to the bottom of things, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
You got to ask the right questions.
Yes, absolutely.
So when the school moved out of here in 1956, where did the school go? Did it go to 126?
No, I'm going to show you.
Okay.
If you can spare the time, I'll show you where they.
Well, how did the men sneak into the school?
That's another building. Here, I don't know that they actually snuck in. There is, at Harvard, there is a brochure for the dormitory here, and a young woman in 1920s dress with very fashionable cloche hats and short skirts are right in front of that fence.
So
Wonderful.
the family kept running the school until what year?
1968.
And that's when they sold the school?
Yes.
And who did they sell the school to?
There are lots of stories there. They sold the school, first of all, to Macmillan Incorporated, the publishers, because they felt that Macmillan would allow the school to continue with its standards. And they did. I worked for Macmillan, and Macmillan was wonderful. They insisted on profit, but beyond that, they left us alone.
So the next building after 1956, is that nearby here?
Mm-hmm.
And in what direction is that?
It is down toward the public.
So down towards the Boston Common.
Toward the public garden, because that's what she's always trying to get closer to the public garden, because the tonier places are close to the public art.
I get.
Okay. Now, 2 sentences on what happened after Gibbs moved out of here. This property was sold to a man who tried to lease them, wasn't able to, but 135 here was leased to Miss Allen's School of Modeling in the 50s. A whole scheme for modeling, a very 1950s thing. And that lasted until 1960, at which point it became apartments, and now it's condos. The Commonwealth School is a co-ed private day school for high school, and is very well thought of. And they have both 151 and 303 Dartmouth. And we are now at 126 Newbury Street, which is the site of the last Katharine Gibbs School in the whole world, and it stopped being Katharine Gibbs School in 2011. So Gibbs actually had a century of excellence. And one of the things that I haven't talked about is the excellence that Mrs. Gibbs and her sons and subsequent owners demanded the students. You don't run a marathon by going out one day and running a few miles. You have to practice over and over again. And that's what Katharine Gibbs insisted upon.
Also, why this location?
By this location, because Macmillan had a hostile takeover in the late 80s. And the hostile takeover was by, it's not Rupert Murdoch, but someone who's very much like him, British, and I can come up with it and send it to you.
So, mentions about where we are. This is Newbury Street, right? This is the heart of Boston.
This was the ultimate shopping district. Where we are right now was originally all homes. And you can see the setback that was very much part of the design of that May, the setback to the buildings. However, Newbury Street is now largely commercial, as we can see.
So this is a pretty big building. If we look, I remember going up there and it was like 4 floors or...
Actually my office was on the 5th floor.
5 floors. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
Went up on my 3, 4, 5, 6 floors.
So that's big for a school on Newbury Street.
Well, actually it is. And remember that this used to be all houses, but it was torn down in the 20s. And this is a very Art Deco design that is in this building. And it has always been, since the 20s, it has been an educational institution until Gibbs.
So the school was here from like the 1980s up to 2011?
Actually, the school was here from...
So I was here...
Gibbs moved in here in 1989.
1989, okay.
Right. And then Gibbs ceased to exist in 2011, and all Gibbs schools became Sanford Brown colleges. But that's because I haven't told you, after Macmillan and after that hostile takeover, new owner who is said to the president of Gibbs, "I'll never sell Gibbs. It is just such a wonderful brand. I'll never sell it." 3 months later, Gibbs was for sale because he had paid too much for Macmillan. And it was for sale. It was bought by Phillips Colleges in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now, I know nothing about Shreveport, but they knew they were buying a brand, but they knew nothing about what made the brand.
So when Katharine Gibbs was here in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, what was its brand like, and what students came here and what did they study?
Well, by the 80s and 90s and into the 21st century, we have a situation where secretaries are no longer being used in business because people are doing their own correspondence. And while Gibbs had the best English class course in the world, according to Gordon Gibson, I think he's right, it was no longer considered all that important. So Gibbs started to spread out, went to word processing first, then went to hotel and restaurant management. And by the time Phillips actually had to sell the college because they had run into trouble with the Department of Education, and they sold it to 3 former Macmillan executives who were, they knew what the brand was like, and they tried for 3 years. But the problem is that in the public mind, Gibbs was associated with secretarial studies, which was no longer a viable subject. So they sold it then to a group called Career Education. And Career Education was the owner when everything shut down. And Career Education added the computer network operations, added all of the medical courses, and...
So in 90s and early 2000s, did Gibbs still have a good reputation? Was the education valuable?
I think that the reputation had very definitely changed because I would meet people, I still meet people in airports and I say, Katharine Gibbs, and they go, "Oh, wow, that's so wonderful." But what they're thinking of is an older style of excellence and exclusivity that simply doesn't belong in the 21st century. So I would say that the Gibbs reputation did suffer a lot. But this building, I will do a sidebar on this building, has always been an educational institution.
But the name, even though in those days, like in the 90s and early 2000s, the Katharine Gibbs name, or Gibbs College of Boston, was very well known.
I think so, but people tell me, oh, well, people from the 50s and 60s say, oh, it's not the same. Well, of course it isn't the same. Everything changes.
Yeah.
Right? And it is still a name that in this part of the world does have some real weight. And under Macmillan, there were 11 schools all the way down to Washington, D.C.
So when you do these tours, are they targeted towards somebody that went to Katharine Gibbs School or knows somebody who went, or is this just a must-see as a part of the New England history?
I think that it is for Gibbs people, and it is for history buffs who want to know more about the history of Back Bay, and it is for people who are just curious about the city of Boston, because Gibbs was an important part of the city of Boston.
So when we talk about in terms of Boston history, like if I went back to those days, the early 1900s and up to when the school was closed, if you lived in Boston, you knew Gibbs School, right?
Absolutely, you did. And in fact, people could tell Gibbs students during the time when there was a dress code, they could tell Gibbs students by the way they were dressed, because they were these young people dressed professionally. And of course, we no longer do that, but there was a very real.
So what was there more to the education at Katharine Gibbs? Was it only education, or you think it also created some ambience for the students and a matter of their attitude?
Absolutely correct. In fact, the topics that Gibbs was teaching were being taught by everyone. I mean, if you're teaching shorthand, if you're teaching typing or keyboarding, if you're teaching filing, it's not unique. It better be the same, or you're not going to have a filing system that works. But the one thing that was unique was the English course, which was very, very quick. But also the thing that Mrs. Gibbs did from the very beginning was, she said, you are here with the best people to get the best education. And she kept telling them that the graduates that over and over and over. And, when they repeat something, it works.
So
Remember,
how often do you do these tours?
I do them once a month, and the information is on my website, which is Doherty, DOHERTY.com.
We're going to put the name of the website and your email, if you don't mind, in the description of this video.
Okay.
So people will know how to get in touch with you.
Absolutely.
And I am sure that those who are watching this video are very much thankful to you for taking your time and carrying on the legacy. And as long as you're out here telling people about Katharine Gibbs School, that name and the legacy lives on.
Yes, indeed. And sometimes when we're on Marlborough Street, people will stop and say, really? I never knew that about this building. Oh, I'm going to come to your tour the next time. So, yes, it is a matter of getting the word out there. And I do have so much more to tell you about this building and about all buildings. But we need to shut it down.
We will be back. Hi, everybody. So my name is Valentin Komarovskiy. I go by Val. And I went to Katharine Gibbs School when this was Katharine Gibbs School back in the early 2000s. So I came here in the year 2000. I graduated Newton South in 1999, and I came, did other things for about a year, didn't want to go to college, and then I went here. And why did I go to Katharine Gibbs School? Because back in those days, it was one of the premier colleges in New England to go for things like network administration or computer technology, computer technical skills. And I went here and it was almost all girls. And for me in those days, it was extremely appealing. And it was right on Newbury Street. I got a ton of parking tickets when I came here. One time I even got a boot in my car. I was here for about a year and a half. I got my associate's degree here in network operations management. I took some programming classes before I came here. And I've been around computers since I was 10 years old. But I'm really glad that I went here because it's a part of my history, and the skills that I got here and the people that I met are irreplaceable. And I thank Doherty for taking her time today to show me around and give me a little bit more about the history, because it's really invaluable. And wherever you are around the world, I recommend that you come here and take the tour. And I will try to come back here and be here for the tour with you. Thank you, Doherty.